cake was already on the table when my son told me I wasn't welcome at my own retirement party. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. I just stood there in the driveway of the house I'd built with 32 years of shift work at the mill, looking at my son through the front window, watching him laugh at something his wife had said. And I thought, he doesn't even know I can see him. That was the moment everything changed for me. Not when I found out about the bank account. Not when the lawyer called. That moment in the driveway, in November, with the gravel under my boots and my breath turning to fog, that was when I understood what had been happening for the past 2 years. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense unless you understand who I was before all of it. My name is Douglas. I'm 63 years old. I worked at a paper mill outside of Sudbury, Ontario for 32 years. I started at 20 and I retired, or was pushed into retiring depending on how you look at it, at 52, after a back injury that left me with 2 fused vertebrae and a settlement that was less than generous, but more than nothing. I used that money carefully. I bought a small house on Lakeshore Road. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a detached garage, a yard that backed onto a creek. In the summer, you could hear the frogs. In the winter, the creek froze and you could walk out on the ice and feel like the only man on earth. My wife, Patricia, passed away 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She was 51. We had 4 months between the diagnosis and the end, and I can tell you that 4 months is both an eternity and nothing at all. Our son Brendan was 22 when she died. He took it hard. I thought he'd come through it. Kids are resilient, people kept telling me. He'll find his footing. And for a while, he did. He got a job in property management in Toronto. He met a woman, Cassandra. Nice enough, I thought, at first. Very organized, very certain about things. The kind of person who corrects your grammar at the dinner table and calls it helpful. They got engaged 3 years ago. I flew down to Toronto for the dinner. I bought a bottle of Inniskillen Riesling because I remembered Brendan saying once that he liked Niagara wines. Cassandra had already picked a different wine for the table. Mine sat off to the side. I didn't say anything. I poured myself a glass later when no one was looking. The wedding was last June. I paid for a significant portion of it, close to $40,000, which for a retired man living on CPP and a modest RRSP is not a small thing. I want to be clear about that number. $40,000. I didn't borrow it. I didn't take it from anything I couldn't afford. But I felt it, I'm telling you, because later, when the other numbers start coming in, you need to understand the scale of what I'm talking about. I paid it because Brendan asked me to. He sat across from me at the Tim Hortons near my house, the one on Regent, where I go every morning, and he said, "Dad, I know it's a lot, but Cassandra's family isn't able to contribute much, and we really want this to be special." He looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was 9 years old and wanted me to stay up past his bedtime. I said yes. Of course I said yes. The wedding was in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Beautiful venue, old stone building, vineyard behind it, the kind of place that costs what it costs and doesn't apologize for it. I sat in the front row. Brendan looked handsome. Cassandra looked at him the way you want someone to look at your child on their wedding day. I cried a little. I'm not ashamed of that. What I am ashamed of is that I didn't see what was already in motion. 3 months after the wedding, Brendan called me. He said he and Cassandra were thinking of buying a house. The Toronto market was rough. I knew that. Everyone knew that. And they'd found something in the East End, a semi-detached in the Beaches neighborhood, listed at just over $1.2 million. He said the bank had approved them for $800,000, but they needed a gap loan for the rest. He asked if I could help. I said I'd have to think about it. He said he understood. He didn't push. He was very calm about it, which I remember now, as a sign I missed entirely. 2 days later, Cassandra called me. She said she knew it was a big ask. She said she hoped I understood how much it would mean to them. She said the neighborhood had a school nearby, and she said it with a particular kind of weight. The way you mention schools when you want someone to picture grandchildren. I transferred $250,000 into Brendan's account. I want you to sit with that number, $250,000. I did not make him sign anything. I did not have a lawyer draft an agreement. I transferred it because he was my son and Patricia was gone, and I thought, what am I saving it for if not this? They bought the house. I visited once at Christmas. It was a nice house. Cassandra had decorated it carefully. Everything matched, every pillow coordinated with every throw. She'd bought a coffee maker that cost more than my first car. I slept in the guest room, and in the morning I made coffee in my mug and sat at their kitchen island and felt, for the first time, like a visitor in my son's life. Then came the retirement party. Here is something I should explain about the party. It was not my idea. I did not want a retirement party. I had quietly retired years ago, never made a fuss about it. But Brendan had called in October 2 months before and said that he and Cassandra wanted to throw me something. A proper celebration, Dad. You worked your whole life. You deserve it. I said it wasn't necessary. He said it would be small, just family, a few friends. He said he'd take care of everything. I said fine. He asked me for the keys to my house. He said he wanted to set up early, hang some things, get it ready before I arrived. I gave him the spare set, the same spare set I'd had cut for him years ago for emergencies. I thought nothing of it. I drove up to my own house on a Saturday afternoon in December. It was about 4 o'clock, already getting dark the way it does in northern Ontario in winter. The sky going that specific shade of pewter that means the temperature is dropping fast. I pulled into the driveway and I could see lights on inside. I could see people moving. Brendan through the window, laughing with Cassandra. I recognized my neighbor Roger's truck parked on the street. I sat in the car for a moment, just taking it in. My house, my retirement, my son, who I had given everything to. I got out of the car. I walked to the front door. I knocked, which felt strange, knocking at my own door, but I could hear music, and I didn't want to startle anyone. Brendan opened the door. He looked at me for a moment before he spoke. There was something in his expression that I couldn't read. Not surprise, exactly. More like calculation. Dad, he said, I didn't think you'd be here this early. I said I'd driven up straight from the city. I said I thought the party was at 4. He said it was. He said he just meant he thought I might stop somewhere on the way. Then Cassandra appeared behind him. She put her hand on his arm in a way that struck me as deliberate. Douglas, she said. She never called me Dad. She never called me anything warm. We actually need to speak with you before you come in. I stood on my own front step. In December. In the cold. And my son. My Brendan. The boy I'd coached in hockey. The boy I'd driven to university in a pickup truck packed with everything he owned. The boy I'd held at his mother's funeral. My son said, Dad, this is hard to say, but this isn't going to be your house much longer, and we think tonight might not be the best time for you to be here. The words didn't make sense at first. The way words sometimes don't make sense when they're too far outside what you expect to hear. I said, What? Cassandra pulled out a folder. She had a folder. She had a folder. She had a folder she had prepared for this. She said that when I transferred the money for the house, I had also, according to documentation she had prepared, agreed to use my Lakeshore Road property as collateral. She said there was paperwork. She said it had all been handled through a private lending arrangement. She said the terms were clear. I told her I had never signed anything like that. She said I had. She held up a piece of paper with something that looked, from a distance, like my signature. She said the lawyer had handled it. I felt, in that moment, the particular cold that has nothing to do with weather. The cold that comes from inside. The cold that is the opposite of warmth, and the warmth I'd felt at that wedding, and the warmth I'd felt when I transferred that money, all of it going somewhere I couldn't follow. I drove away. I want to be honest about that. I did not make a scene. I got back in my car and I drove to the Tim Hortons on Regent, my Tim Hortons, the one I go to every morning. And I sat in the parking lot and I ordered a medium double-double through the drive-thru. And I sat there with it in my hands, and I stared at the steering wheel for a long time. But here is what Brendan did not know. He did not know about Arthur. Arthur is my oldest friend. We met at the mill in 1989 when we were both 20 years old and stupid and invincible, and we've been friends for every year since. Arthur retired from the mill 5 years before I did and spent the last decade of his working life as a paralegal at a firm in Sudbury. He knows things. More importantly, he knows people, and 3 weeks before the retirement party, 3 weeks before, because I am not a fool, even when I love someone more than I should. I had called Arthur and told him what I was beginning to suspect. I told him about the transfer. I told him about a conversation I had had with my bank manager, a woman named Elaine who had the kind of direct manner I've always respected, who had called me in September to ask if I understood the nature of a document that had been submitted referencing my property. I told her I did not know what she was talking about. She told me she had flagged it. She told me I should get legal advice. I hadn't told Brendan about that call. I hadn't told anyone. I went to see a lawyer, a woman named Ms. Tremblay, in the same office where Arthur worked, who had a small photo of a golden retriever on her desk and spoke to me like a person, not a client. And I told her everything. About the transfer, about the property, about the transfer, about the document with what was supposed to be my signature. She took 3 days to review it. Then she called me and said, "Douglas, the document is fraudulent. The signature is not yours. I've already contacted the Ontario Securities Commission and the local RCMP detachment. Do not transfer any more money. Do not sign anything. And try not to let on that you know." I had kept that to myself for 3 weeks. I had sent Brendan normal texts. I had called on Sunday evenings the way I always did. I had said yes to the party without a single word of what I knew. And so, on that Saturday night in December, while I sat in the Tim Hortons parking lot with my double-double, my phone rang. It was Miss Tremblay. She said the detachment had confirmed a timeline. She said they were ready to move. She asked if I was still willing to go back to the house. I said yes. I finished my coffee. I drove back to Lakeshore Road. I parked 2 houses down and walked up the driveway in the dark. I knocked on the door again. Brendan answered again, and this time his expression was more confident. The expression of someone who thinks they've already won. "Dad, I told you. I know what you told me," I said. "I need to come inside." He started to say something about the paperwork. Cassandra appeared again, folder in hand, and I noticed for the first time that there was someone else in the living room I didn't recognize. A man in his 40s in a very new jacket, sitting at my kitchen table, which had been moved. And I realized with a flatness in my chest that they had used the party as a pretext, a gathering of witnesses to some kind of official handover they had planned. I stepped inside. Brendan said my name in a warning tone. The man in the jacket stood up. And then there were headlights at the window. 2 sets, then a third. Brendan looked past me. His face changed. The first car was the RCMP. The second was Miss Tremblay's, and she had brought a notary. The third was Arthur's, and Arthur got out of his car holding a Tim Hortons coffee, because Arthur knows what matters. Miss Tremblay came to the door and introduced herself to Brendan, who had gone a particular shade of gray. She told him that a fraudulent document had been prepared using a forged signature, my signature, and that this constituted a serious matter under the criminal code. She told the man in the jacket, whose name I still don't know and don't want to know, that he should speak with the officers. Cassandra said very quietly, "Brendan." Just his name, nothing else. The RCMP officers were professional. They were not dramatic about it. They asked questions. They looked at documents. They took the folder Cassandra had prepared, her careful, coordinated folder, into evidence. I sat in my own living room, on my own couch, next to Arthur, who didn't say anything, because he knew I didn't need him to say anything. He just handed me his coffee because mine was finished. And I took it, and I sat there in the house I built, and I listened to the sound of what happens when you finally stop pretending you don't know what you know. Brendan was charged. It took several months for everything to work through the courts, and I am not going to tell you it was easy, because it wasn't. There is nothing easy about watching your child answer to something like this. There is nothing easy about sitting across a table from him in a courthouse hallway while his lawyer talks to Miss Tremblay, and knowing that you are both in this place because of love given without conditions, which is a real thing, and greed received without gratitude, which is also a real thing. Cassandra left before the trial. She moved back to her family in Vancouver. I have not heard from her since, and I don't expect to. I got the money back. Not all of it. Enough. The house is still mine. I still walk out on the creek ice in winter and feel like the only man on earth, except now I know that feeling for exactly what it is. Earned. Not given. Not inherited. Earned with 32 years of early mornings and a back that will never be entirely right, and a wife I still miss every day. Brendan called me in the spring. It was a short call. He said he was sorry. He did not say it well. The words were practiced, lawyered, careful. But somewhere underneath the careful words, I heard the voice of the boy I raised. And that boy was genuinely sorry. And I believe that, even if I don't know what to do with it yet. I told him I needed more time. He said he understood. I said, "Your mother would have been heartbroken." I meant it as the hardest thing I could say to him, and I could tell from the silence that it landed that way. We didn't speak again for several months after that. I still go to Tim Hortons every morning, the same one on Regent. The woman who works the morning drive-thru knows my order. She says, "Medium double-double," and I say yes, and she has the cup waiting before I've even pulled up to the window. It's a small thing, but small things are what a life is made of. And I have learned, later than I should have, and at a price I should not have had to pay, that the people who take the small things for granted are the people who don't understand yet what it costs to build them. I built something. It is still mine, and I'm not going anywhere. I still think about that driveway, the gravel under my boots, the pewter sky, Brendan laughing through the window, not knowing I could see him. There's a version of that night where I knocked on the door and fell apart, where I believed the folder, where I signed whatever they put in front of me and drove away and never came back. That version exists. It almost happened. And if it had, I wouldn't be sitting here now, in my own house listening to the creek. What stopped it wasn't luck. I want to be honest about that because I think people tell themselves it was luck when something goes right, and it lets them off the hook from examining what actually happened. What stopped it was three things, and they didn't arrive all at once. They built up slowly, over years, the way anything real builds. The first was knowing right from wrong and being willing to act on it, even when it cost me something. When Elaine at the bank called me in September, I could have told myself it was nothing. I could have protected the idea of my son by ignoring the evidence that he was not who I needed him to be. That would have been easier, but I have lived long enough to know that choosing comfort over truth is how a man ends up standing on his own front step in December, being told he no longer owns it. Decency isn't just about how you treat other people. It's about whether you're honest with yourself first. The second was using my head, not panicking, not confronting Brendan in anger before I had anything solid. Miss Tremblay didn't find what she found because I was lucky. She found it because I sat down, organized what I knew, brought it to someone with the right knowledge, and let the process work. I have seen men my age get taken advantage of because they were too proud to ask for help, or too trusting to question a document, or too tired to fight. I was tired. I am still tired, some mornings. But tired doesn't mean done. The third was simply not giving up. After Patricia died, after the mill, after the back, after everything, I kept the house. I kept the routine. I kept showing up to my own life even when it felt like the life was arguing back. That stubbornness, that refusal to be finished, is what let me make the phone calls and keep the secrets and drive back to Lakeshore Road a second time that night instead of going home and pouring a drink and pretending it wasn't happening. Brendan made his choices. Cassandra made hers. I'm not here to explain them or excuse them. What I know is that the consequences followed directly from the actions. His, mine, theirs, and that is not a comfortable thing to believe in, because it means you are responsible for your outcomes in a way that doesn't leave room for blaming anyone else, including me. I gave too much money without conditions. I saw what I wanted to see for longer than I should have. That is on me. But I also built something worth protecting, and I protected it. Arthur called me the morning after everything. He didn't say much. He said, "You okay?" I said I thought so. He said, "Good, I'll pick up the coffees." That's what it looks like when someone has actually been there for 30 years. No folder, no forged signature, just a man who shows up. The creek is frozen again now. I walked out on it this morning before it was light, and I stood there in the dark and the cold, and I thought, this is mine. I earned it, and I'm not going anywhere.